Okay, so I'm going to be talking about cognitive and interactional affordances of resonance in dialogue. And begin with a quote from W.H. Auden. "We're all here on earth to help others. What on earth the others are here for, I don't know." And this sounds a bit snarky, perhaps, from Auden, but there's a quote that's actually very similar in intellectual content, but perhaps the tone is different.
Excuse me, Jack, if I'm not sure that you meant for us to also see the next slide every time you talk. I'm not sure this is what you meant. I just want to make sure that this is, yeah.
Yeah, not what I meant, but to adjust that now, maybe it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, let's see if there's a quick way to do that. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So what other persons afford comprises the whole world of the whole realm of social significance for human beings. So Gibson, of course, is known for his theory of affordances, among other things. This basically says that other people are affordances. So we are each other's affordances. So what I want to do here today is ask three questions. I want to ask, how does resonance help build the structure of engagement and dialogue between co-participants, between interlocutors? How does the ability to create resonance offer affordances for interlocutors? So what perhaps are these affordances? And then finally, what consequences does resonance have for cognition, meaning, and interaction? So Gibson says that the affordances of the environment are what it offers to the animals including us. He hasn't got a lot to say about language, but he does say that words can be used to direct the sense organs, visual and auditory and so on, towards parts of the larger environment that the speaker has perceived, but the hearer has not. So this is a conception of the environment within which we live, but mediated by language. And here again is that quote, which maybe in this context we can understand a little more deeply. So we want to be thinking about, to the extent that other people know the same language, know the same grammar, the same words and structures, does that comprise an affordance that we can then tap into in interaction? Now, here I think it's useful to look at the difference between affordance and ability, or the necessity to acknowledge both of them. So basically an affordance is an aspect of the environment that contributes to an activity by an agent who has some ability. But if you do not have that ability, then you will not be able to tap into that aspect of the environment. So if you have blind fish living in a cave, they don't see the environment. Maybe they touch it, but don't see it. So you have to have the ability to engage with the environment. Okay, a number of references there. Now, one of the things that I'll be using to present this talk is Resonator. And Resonator is designed to basically take conversations like this and analyze them into structures that include resonance, as the title suggests. It's free and open source software for the available for PC and Mac currently. Eventually, we want to have it available for phones. I want to thank my collaborators who have helped with this. I'll mention that one thing we've been doing over the last year is localizing this. So it's now localized for about 8 or 10 languages, one of which is Hebrew. So it does a nice job of shows Hebrew menus to the user and handles Hebrew data right to left and all that. Okay, so one of the things that happens in dialogue is that we have a coupling between your words and my words, produces our dialogue. So this is a joint construction that we create, and that has all kinds of interesting consequences. To help us understand how this works, it's useful to have the concept of resonance. I define resonance as the catalytic activation of affinities across utterances. this is strongly linked to parallelism. So especially when we have parallelism of multiple resonances, this can lead to a structural coupling of two or more utterances. So we have basically a coupling of your utterance with my utterance that can lead to important consequences for meaning, for cognition, for interaction. Okay, and so here, I'm going to try to play the audio for you with a different piece of software. So we'll see if that works. Well, maybe we'll just have to do without it for now. Okay, so this is the pretty much close to the beginning of this interaction. And there's 4 people in this conversation. 2 of them are, well, there's 2 couples in effect, an older couple and a younger couple. The younger couple is 2 men, Cam and Fred. The older couple is Wes, the male, and Joe, the female. Okay, so isn't she 40? We'll see you, laughter, 43. My goodness. Okay, so that might be a little bit hard to process here. It's kind of in the middle of a very dynamic conversation. In effect, there's 2 conversations going on. Wes is on the phone. He's basically hanging up the phone with somebody else. Cam and Joe are interacting. And I think looking at the resonance can help us kind of tune in a little bit to how these people are creating a structure of engagement. So this is, by the way, I would say it's a task that we all face very often in conversation, how to create sense when multiple conversations are going on, people are coming and going, some people are laughing, some people are, how do we create sense out of that? One way is to map resonances together. So isn't she 40 and 43? We can separate this out and put these into little, this is all screenshots from Resonator here. And then we can link 40 and 43. So it's easier now perhaps to have a more specific representation of Joe's construction of meaning. She's engaging with Cam's utterance in line 12, isn't she 40? So when she says 43, it's not just a number out of in thin air, it's obviously engaging what you could call this ellipsis. So isn't she 40? She is 40, something like that. Okay, this is actually a little bit earlier in the conversation. Oh my God, I think they're all nuts. So she had to have it. She had to have the extra one. The line numbers on the left are going to give you some sense of where these excerpts fit in the conversation. Okay, again, let's foreground the bits that look like they have resonance going on. Here, Joe is resonating with herself. That's quite common. It's perfectly legal, and I do consider that to be dialogic syntax, dialogic resonance. Dialogicality in the sense is borrowed from Bakhtin. It's the concept of engaging with the words of those who have spoken before. Well, we ourselves have spoken before ourselves in the present moment, so we can engage with ourselves. Okay, so she had to have it. She had to have the extra one. So here we can see what I call the frame resonance. This is, by the way, let's see. Does that help with getting rid of the next slide or not? No, still seeing the next slide. Okay, at least you're not seeing
notes.
Notes. Okay, so obviously we have another, this is Joe resonating with herself, as I said. These are exact matches here so far. She had to have. This is one possibility for dialogic resonance. It's not the only possibility. We can vary things in all kinds of ways. These 4 elements constitute what I call frame resonance. You could call this parallelism from the perspective of Jakobson or other authors. The frame resonance is either exact matches or, let's say, minor inflectional modifications or substitution of you and I. It's basically matches that are not controversial or difficult or challenging in any way. So the frame resonance often sets up something more that comes later, which is the focal resonance. So let's look at that. Okay, so here we can link it and the extra one. So she had to have it. Joe, I think, realizes that she's maybe unclear about what the it is. And so she clarifies that that's the extra one. One thing that happens in, if we think about abilities and affordances, part of what we know that helps us to engage with prior discourse, we know the grammar of our language, and so we know things about constituent structure. If someone did not know constituent structure, I would suggest that one thing that happens in resonance very often is a mapping of a single word to several words. So if we were wondering whether the extra one constitutes a constituent, then the fact that it maps to a single word suggests that it's also a single unit at some level. So this kind of one-to-many mapping is, I think, part of the ability that supports the affordances of dialogic engagement. Okay, so a question that often comes up when I talk about resonance is how does resonance relate to priming? And some people think, well, isn't that basically priming that you're talking about? I think it's very important to speak carefully when we talk about priming. I would say that priming as defined and created as a concept in the literature basically through psycholinguistic experimentation, beginning with Catherine Bach and continuing to Pickering and Brannigan and many others. It's a cognitive facilitation. It's crucial that it is automatic, it's obligatory, it's not volitional. Okay, so your brain, priming is something your brain does to you, which facilitates the reproduction of language. It does not, however, require it. So what happens next, potentially, is you may have an action that follows the facilitation, which is to reproduce a structure or a word. And sometimes these are glossed over, this difference. People looking at corpus data say, well, this is priming. Well, okay, I would say it's reproduction that provides evidence for priming. It's not that different. For some papers, it doesn't matter, but it's important to keep the concepts straight. Now, where does resonance come in? Well, resonance is what happens next. So if there is a second production, a reproduction, then you get resonance, which starts to generate this catalysis. So this is basically the downstream consequences of reproduction, possibly triggered by priming. If there's no reproduction, then we're not really in a position to get resonance. So priming facilitates automatically. It does not determine outcomes. We still have a choice whether to reproduce or not. If that choice is made, then we get this triggering of consequences. So it's very important to keep clear that these things are connected, but they're not. None of these can be reduced to the other. Okay, next example. Joe and Wes, again, a couple, but there's 4 people present. It's Christmas time, which will become obvious pretty soon, I think. Okay, see, I said to Wes, what did I do with my hearing aid now? So there's a number of resonances here that have to do with Wes having trouble hearing, and then things get repeated to him. But right here, what we have is a resonance between I knew and I knew there'd be trouble. So again, this seems to be a pattern with Joe, sorry, that she often comes out with a somewhat elliptical form, perfectly grammatical. I knew, see, I knew. Well, what did you know? I knew there'd be trouble. So she expands on her own utterance and does this kind of dialogic engagement here. So this is part of our affordance, part of our knowledge of grammar. Syntacticians would talk about ellipsis, and these are perfectly appropriate concepts here. What I'm trying to show is that basically everything that linguists like to talk about in language exists in some sense as a as an affordance that can be mobilized in interaction. Okay, I think this, maybe just have one or two more examples. Okay, the Packers got their Merry Christmas. This is Wes reporting on his conversation, phone conversation. Joe says, "Oh, did they?" Now, at that moment, we might wonder who the Packers are and what it means to get their Merry Christmas. Cam comes in with another gloss, which we can look at like this. Did they win? Did they win? Okay. So the Packers are the Green Bay Packers. They're a football team. They're playing a game around, a football game around Christmas. People in Michigan tend to be fanatical about football, especially about the Green Bay Packers. So this entire family seems to depend on the Green Bay Packers winning in order to maintain family happiness. So, so the Green Bay Packers got their Merry Christmas. Now, 30 lines later in the conversation, Cam says, "So now we can have a Merry Christmas." And in between, I won't go over this, but they basically have said that if the Packers had lost, then everyone would be grumpy and so on, okay? So we have a lot of interesting things going on here. Getting Merry Christmas equals winning. Now this is definitely frame and focal resonance here. So on the left side here with did they, and okay, this is framing resonance. You can say mapping got their Merry Christmas to win is focal resonance. This is not at all predictable. You're not going to find this in dictionaries. You're not going to find this in a lot of contexts. So this is something that it's a very easy mapping if you are a participant in this conversation and you have the abilities and the affordances. So these are things that the biggest computer models today, I suspect, cannot do this kind of analogy between get a Merry Christmas and winning a football game. Okay, this one I'll just do pretty quickly here, just to give you a sense of another kind of thing that happens in dialogic resonance. So did you pick out a tree? Where did you put the tree? Where did you put it? Where did you put the tree? Put it in the living room where the love seat was. So one thing that sometimes people worry about in the context of resonance is it seems to them that you're sort of stuck eternally in a loop of repeating the same words or same structures. This is very far from the case. This is not how people use their ability to create dialogic resonance. They very easily transition from arguments to adjuncts, from basically expanding into prepositional phrases, and the prepositional phrases can have post modifiers and so on. So people maintain the coherence through resonance, through engagement with a prior discourse, but they mobilize their capacity for linear syntax to kind of do these horizontal extensions, which then become a resource for more vertical resonance, okay? So one thing I haven't really talked about in all of this, this might come as a bit of a surprise, but everything I've shown you is organized according to intonation units. Every line in the Santa Barbara corpus of spoken American English, which all these data are from, every line marks a single intonation unit. And this is sort of an accident, maybe, of transcription, that we produced 65,000 manually coded intonation units. And I spent a lot of time looking at them and started to notice vertical alignments of things. I've since come to the, at least the hypothesis, that the intonation unit is kind of the ideal prosodic unit for creating an affordance for resonance, okay? Because you get a lot of structures. It might be a clause. Some people say intonation units are clauses. Well, not all that often. I mean, not exclusively. They can be a prepositional phrase. It can be a noun phrase. But whatever it is, it seems to provide a rhythmic template, you could say, that invites affordance between, resonance between the elements that are in it. Now, this is a comment that kind of echoes back to to the wonderful paper by F. Fedorenko yesterday, in which she talked about brain rhythms that were maxing out around 6 words. And this is a distribution of the length of intonation units. The median is 3 words, and by the time you get to 6 or 7 words, that's pretty much accounts for well over 90% of the data, I would say. So there's obviously some speculation going on here, but there's reasons to think that intonation units may provide a foundation for a deep-seated, possibly innate foundation for that provides affordances, prosodic affordances for grammatical engagement. Okay, so my conclusions. When we use language in dialogic interaction, your abilities become my affordances and my abilities become your affordances. So if you and I speak the same language, if we have read the same books, know about the same football teams, all of these things, the grammar, the prosody, the cultural knowledge becomes affordances, resources for engagement. The intonation unit represents a fundamental structure of spoken language, offering a prosodic frame, basically this open-ended template that can contain anything you need to create these structural affordances. And we find that affordance and ability are inextricably linked in dialogue via collaborative practices of creating and interpreting dialogic resonance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack, for this really interesting talk. And the floor is open for questions. Yes, sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name, Vinicius Makut. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I was just wondering, so it's a sort of like a big picture question, and I don't think any of us would have the answer, but still, I'm sort of the question that I'm always struggling with is how do we reconcile, right, these sort of like interactional approaches, right? So interaction-oriented, dialogue-oriented to basically more cognitive approaches, right? Where we see, well, people are trying to reduce uncertainty to one another, but they're also trying to, right, produce things such that they minimize their own efforts, right? At the same time, while, you know, trying to do audience design and all these things. So how do we combine those things? What is your opinion here?
Well, it would be only an opinion here because I don't have direct evidence, but I first want to affirm that this is a very important question. And I think the word combination actually is the key word here. Some people like to say, well, I'm a social linguist or a social cultural linguist, so language is social. And other people say I'm a cognitive linguist, so language is cognitive. Well, speakers don't have the luxury of turning off their brains while they engage in social interaction. That's not going to work very well. So we're doing both of these at once, and there can't be a contradiction. If there is a contradiction, it's in our theories, and it means our theories are not up to the job. So I think what's really interesting is to say, well, what kind of cognition do you need to do this very rapid, fine-grained engagement? There's a lot of talk about interaction coming out of, let's see, work by Tanya Stivers, Steve Levinson, and so on, that talks a lot about this 200 millisecond synchronization between question and answer. What I see is that's a very interesting question, that close timing, but we see a lot of things where we're erasing the sequentiality in order to create cotemporality. And so either I am physically overlapping with you at the same time, or I am mapping my utterance so that you need to do kind of time shifting to map it back. So there's, this raises very interesting cognitive questions as to what is the time window within which we can operate. I think there is some indication from, again, from brain studies that delta waves may be relevant to this as kind of the longer waves. And what we want, in a sense, is we want a unit of working memory that's big enough to hold 2 intonation units. Is maybe the way to think about it. We want your intonation unit and my intonation unit, that we can hold those in memory and create that engagement. Now that's, anyway, that's one speculation about how this might be happening. But it does seem that we have some kind of a time shifting ability, that we can take your utterance from a few seconds ago and my utterance from right now and treat them as kind of inhabiting the same tree, if you want to look at it that way.